Hey, webinar listeners, thanks for joining us. This is the first, hopefully, of many in a series of API and SDK webinars that we'll be doing with pretty much the entire API and SDK team. So we have a couple people online. We'll just give a couple more minutes maybe for some others to join. In the meantime, if you're not familiar with the team, this is us. We've got Raghu, who's product manager, Guillermo, Dustin, Brianna, and Ryan. We're all here to help answer some questions and give you a little presentation about the sensors. So excited and looking forward to see what you guys think about this and what you have in store as use cases for it as well. Let's see, we're about a minute in and we do have some more. Okay, we've got a couple more people coming in. So what I wanted to do before we dive in, I just wanted to kind of set the groundwork for our presentation today. We are going to be focused on the SDK sensors. So that's what our presentation is going to be about today. We're not going into general SDK API usage. We'll probably get to that later on in future episodes. But for now, we are very much focused on the SDK sensors. So the presentation will be maybe 5 to 10 minutes, something like that, and then we'll just open it up for Q&A. We want to give as much time as possible for your questions, and we've got everybody here who can help answer your questions. That being said, we would like to keep the questions focused on technical API, SDK related, and sensor related questions. So anything else, we can talk offline, and just because, we are limited with the amount of time that we have today. So with that said, looks like we've got a good number of people who are in now, and I just wanted to hand it off to Raghu.
Thank you, Amir. Welcome all. This is the first of the series, as Amir mentioned. This is our forum for you today, just with exclusive partners on developer tools focused on the SDK sensors as a topic today. And again, we will have, the intent is to have this on a very recurring basis. And if you have more topics that you want to hear from us, we'll come back to this. We'll provide you an email where you can write to us on topics, but expect more to come on this series itself. Going into the conversation for today and the motivation for SDK sensors, you would recollect in some of the shop talk series that Amir had done last year, one of the questions that has come up to us on a recurring basis is geofencing. Now, how do I know as my customers walk through a model, how do I know where they are? What controls can I have? And in the past, the solution has been using a combination of API SDK. I would find out in which sweep my customer is, and try and relate that back to a SDK and have a solution having these two together. But now what we have is a new capability. Guillermo, our dev lead, is going to walk us through that. But that's exactly the problem that we are going to tackle with this solution. How do we know the position of the customer, of my visitor in my model within the SDK capability world? So with that background, I'll hand it over to Guillermo. And again, if you have any questions along the route, keep them coming in. We will address them towards the end of the presentation. It could be technical questions, any product questions, we are here to answer. With that, I'll hand it over to Guillermo.
Hi, I'm Guillermo, technical lead for the SDK, and I'm going to be sharing my screen. Okay, so this is a short sort of description of a new feature we had launched with the SDK several weeks back. We call them sensors. They're actually sensors and sources, but it's easier to talk about sensors. The topics that we're going to talk about are what are they? What are sensors, and why would we use a sensor? We'll look at some examples and then go right into feedback questions. So first thing is, what is an SDK sensor and a source? So a sensor is a volume that can detect sources contained within a space. As you can see here, we have a camera and we have what's called a frustum. It is a volume that represents what we see in a space. A source is something that is detectable by a sensor. Sources are volumes in the space covered by sensors. A way to think about this, it kind of takes some getting used to this terminology. And a way to think about this is transmitters and receivers. A sensor is a receiver. It's sort of like your, if you're thinking about radio frequency receiver or something like that. And a source is a transmitter, and it's always sending out a signal. So if you get close to a source, you'll get some data about it. As you get further away, you lose the data. Talking a little bit about what the one type of sensor that we support today, and it's called a camera frustum sensor. It's a pyramidal shaped volume used to render the scene, as I stated before. It's the only type that we support, and it captures everything inside of the view. Some useful things about that is whenever the user navigates through a space, the camera frustum moves with the user. Therefore, if the sensor is moving with the camera and we get all this information, we can get all this information about what the user is perceiving of the space. Sources. So sources are very primitive shapes that we can apply to a space, oriented boxes, vertical cylinders, and spheres. These shapes can be used to approximate most 3D things that you might insert into a space. Those things can be anything from matter tags to models like GLTFs or OBJs. It could be rooms, it could be floors, it could be a small part of a room. We've tried to provide some of the basic primitives that you can kind of mold to any kind of object that you want to represent into space. And let's see, cylinders is a particularly interesting case because you can approximate sweeps very well because sweeps are radial, tend to be radial. You can also, if we were to have avatars, you can also represent people or avatars inside of a space using cylinders. Why use SDK sensors? What are the benefits? So first item, sensors implement the common 3D math required to compute intersection between volumes in the space in an efficient way. If some folks have experience in this kind of work, it can become very complex, very, I would say, compute intensive. So it takes a lot of time to develop applications that use this kind of functionality. So we're providing this functionality, meaning it will save you time. Another aspect of this is the sensor system is reactive and provides all the intersection results to your application via the concept of objects and observables. If you've used the SDK previously, we have been moving away from standard sort of polling mechanisms of calling functions and getting data back and using a concept called observables, where we get notified of changes. It helps us be very efficient about things that we compute when they change. So we are actually extending that system now to be not just observables across the iframe or directly from any of the SDK namespace functions, but we're adding objects that you can interact with in a synchronous way. This means less promises, less asynchronicity. Your code looks cleaner. It's easier to maintain. Another aspect of why you want to use sensors. Sensors can enable spatially aware behavior, making your applications more dynamic. Today, a lot of the content that you deal with, things like matter tags, sweeps, labels, floors, rooms, are very static, and they're predefined for you. But with these sensors and sources, you can augment your space with your own kind of things that you can place and react to make it more dynamic. And lastly, the sensor system can be used to approximate any 3D object, as I stated before, even ones unique to your application. So with these primitive shapes, we should be able to get, receive signals from any kind of thing that you can insert into a space. So some examples. So the first example is, actually, let me get my notes. So just a note, the small red box is a debugging tool that we've enabled so that when you're troubleshooting or developing using sensors and sources, you can see where the source is going, where the source is. In this case, what we've done is on the right side, you'll see these boxes, and those represent areas where we've added box sources in the space. And on the left side, you'll see an application that listens to the user entering that space and then displaying the name of that type of space. So it's a contextual information about that space. So this is a way to designate areas in the space. And note that if we were to look at what room or floor this is, likely, I haven't actually checked, but I believe this is one big room. So we've actually subdivided the room into functional areas that are more real, how you might use this space. Next one is an interesting one. So this is a way to manage complexity in a space. As you've seen, there's a lot of spaces that have a very high density of matter tags, which can kind of include some aspects of the model, right? You see less of the model and more of the matter tags. So this is a concept that you can use to manage complexity in the scene. You can collapse 16 matter tags into one, depending on how far away you are from it. You can call this a level of detail. So this is an example of using spheres as a level of detail for matter tags. All doable, dynamically using transient matter tags. These don't have to be inserted in Workshop or anything like that. Lastly, sweep control. So this is a sort of a interesting case where you may want to disable navigation to some sweeps, depending on whether you're close in proximity to another sweep. So this is sort of a toy example of how you might do that, and an ideal case for using the cylinder shape as you approach this area. Note that that cylinder happens to be around the sweep, but there is nothing indicating that it must be around the sweep. It's a little bit arbitrary at this point. So as I enter that cylinder, some sweeps show up. And that is it.
That was great. Thank you, Guillermo. And then as for the audience to relate to some of these, what these capabilities allow you to do is just a simple scenario. Let's say you have a space that you want to have some action automatically trigger. For instance, a real estate listing. As the visitor enters the living room, you want the television to start playing because the visitor is in that particular space. Now you could do that. You could set up a sensor, and as you detect visitors coming in, that particular visitor would have the video start playing because they are in there. Versus having today, you could have a video play. It's ongoing basis, but this gives that personalization and engagement element of our spaces. That's one. And second is, again, building on top of real estate, because that's easy for everybody to relate to. Let's say the same visitor enters kitchen and he looks around, but now he's looking at the refrigerator, and you have a very high-end refrigerator that's there. Now, just because his view is towards the direction, you could detect and show the price tag for this, or have the matter tag, as Guillermo was showing briefly. You could have the matter tag pop up at that point to say, this is worth XYZ dollars. So that's the kind of engagement that allows, that's easily unlocked with SDK sensors. Hopefully that helps you relate to the core capabilities that we unlock with this feature. And also, again, if you could put the slide back on there were a couple of pieces of information on there. Most of you are familiar with our DL, where you can reach out to us at developers@matterport.com. And you could reach out to us at the same DL, and for both questions on this topic or even any topics that you want to see in this forum come back in future, that would be the DL to reach. And there's also, as Guillermo pulls up, you'll be able to see that in a moment. There's also a link to the technical documentation, how SDK sensors can be leveraged.
We will have this recorded, and those links will definitely be available in the description of the recording on YouTube as well. So you can see it there. Yeah,
for sure. And let us know any questions based on what you have heard. And while you take the time to talk through it, maybe again, let's talk a little bit about the motivation for building this. And I alluded to this at the beginning of the call. That the ask for spatial awareness has been a consistent ask, and now in the previous world of API SDK and being able to relate or tie back the sweeps to the location was a lot more complicated. With SDK sensors, how easy does it become, Guillermo? Anything that you want to share on how quick or easy the development becomes with this capability.
Yes, whereas before we had to tie content to directly to a sweep, so you'd have to know the IDs, and the IDs would have to match to a location in a space. So you'd have to identify those, track those, and keep those in your own systems. With a source, a volume source, the volume source itself becomes the thing that you create. That becomes the trigger for your behavior, whereas previously it might have been entering a sweep or not entering or leaving a sweep. So the volume makes it independent of the sweep. As long as your volume covers the entire sweep, then you don't care what the sweep ID is, and you don't have to track that anymore.
Yeah. Easy handling and simpler implementation, and obviously easier maintenance as well. Sure. And we have a question that came in that's from Stephen. I'll read it out. Maybe Guillermo, you could take this. Does the SDK sensor work in VR mode?
Yes. It's a 3D construct, which is part of our general 3D framework. So they would work with it.
Folks, any other questions, keep them coming. And while we have the entire panel here to answer. And anything else in terms of, so this is a feature that was recently launched, and we've had some working demos internally. And if you have any questions on how to implement these, Ryan, who's been our technical support, your point of contact, most of you would have worked very closely with Ryan. He could be our point person to take the questions and work through the solutions as well. So any other questions, team, let them come our way. This is the next question. Again, could the sensors be used to track gaze to provide heat map reports? Guillermo, is that something that's possible?
I assume that means you want to know if people or users are looking at specific parts or areas in the space. If that is true, then you could mark up your space with a few sensors where points of interest. And when they are in view, you would get that data through the callbacks in the sensor system. So the sensor system will tell you if something is in view or not. In addition, it will tell you if it's within range also, if you're in proximity.
So using those event data, they could definitely build the heat maps. That's great. Cool. The next one, what other sensors are you thinking of implementing in the future? Yes, Guillermo.
I can go through a few. We're focused on camera-based sensors. So one concept that we're thinking about is a cylinder-based, instead of a frustum, you would have a cylinder going along a tube going along your camera, which allows you to kind of pinpoint a small area in front of you. That would be one possible thing that we've considered. Other things would be detaching the sensor from the camera and having an arbitrary volume traveling the space. That's where we're thinking about going with it.
Absolutely. And also we are open to hearing from you as well, as our top users of our SDK API capabilities. One of the goals for today's conversation was also to introduce you to this, and we want to hear from you. What other use cases do you think we can unlock on top of these base capabilities? Keep them coming our way. Again, developers@matterport.com is how you could reach out to us and let us know what else you want to see. Any other questions? Keep coming. And if you want to take a moment at this point in time for me to recap again what we've spoken so far. SDK Sensors has been our capability that's been asked for us for a long time, especially around being spatial aware and how you could better engage with customers. This is a first step in that direction. And you could keep engaging with us through support developer@matterport.com portal to share our feedback. And we'll keep it down to 5 more minutes. If you have any questions, please send them over.
So a question from Alberto just came in. Does the sensors functionality be used on SDK or embeds version?
So it can be used for the embed version and for the bundled version.
Very good. I know we have a relatively small audience today. We kept it to really just the power players and with SDK.
Yeah.
But by all means, ask away. The questions panel is down at the bottom. You just tap on that and ask anything you want at this point.
And this could be the time, since we have the time attention from us. There are other topics that you want to listen from us. Yes, obviously you can email us, but put it in the forum on other topics that you want to see here on this forum for our future sessions as well.
Yeah, what topics related to API and SDK are most interesting to you would be great feedback. And we are developing this series, so getting that kind of information from you and what interests you would be very helpful.
We have another question that came in. Is it possible to customize the message shown by the sensor area? So I presume, I think the question here is more about, can I have two different sensor areas and each one have a different message shown up behind those?
Yes. So what you saw in the video was a example that we will be providing with the SDK examples repo. That particular example simply displays a text in the front, but it can actually do anything you want. So yes, it is possible to customize a message if you were to take that example and take the part that you need for your application. You can do, as you please. You have the callback for that.
I don't think we have any more questions coming in. There's one more coming.
Another one from Stephen.
There's one more from Stephen. How does the Sensors SDK work with different tour modes, dollhouse, floor plans, etc.?
It's independent of the modes. So that may be a source of additional sort of consideration when building your application as to whether you want behaviors to occur in one mode versus another if you're using the showcase as the baseline. But it's independent. So if you were to have a box that shows a title and it works in panel mode or inside mode, it would also happen to work in dollhouse. So as you kind of move around, you'll see the same behavior. It's consistent in 3D.
Does that mean that when you go to the dollhouse view, you're actually positioning yourself outside of the sensor, or?
No, the sensor goes with you. Your camera actually moves above the model.
I'm sorry. Okay, I was thinking those spheres that you were showing, not the.
Those are the sources. So those are
the sources. So if you had like a model, you mentioned a model with a whole bunch, and we've seen models that are just completely littered with matter tags, and you can really hardly see and make out what's inside the dollhouse because there's so many matter tags. When you go out to the dollhouse, can you have it so that you really don't see any of them? And then only when you go in, you see the ones that are relevant to you in your area.
Yep. Yes, that would be possible with it.
Now that takes care of, I think, some of the items on the clutter that we hear. This allows you to control what gets shown and what context, and it's help you manage the tags better as well. The next question from Daniel is: any limit on the number or size of boxes, the 3D boxes? I believe that's the.
I would say that the box size cannot be 0, but it probably can be any number greater than 0. It could be large, really large. You could encompass the whole model if that's what you're referring to, Daniel.
And are you limited to the number of sources that you can throw in there?
We have not put any limit to sources, so you can add as many as is allowed on your machine with memory.
Cool.
I don't know how, again, in the spirit of the same question, how crazy can one get with overlapping areas, or is that a concern? Is that something to keep in mind? I think.
I would expect them to be overlapping. That's very common to have that, to use overlapping boxes at different sizes or spheres to change the behavior. I would expect that. The visuals may not look nice, but I think the visuals are merely a tool to just see what you're doing. At runtime, you wouldn't actually turn those on.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, to say the colored boxes and the cubes that we were seeing is for the developer view. So when we really implement those as sensors within SDK, the end user will not see that. Any other questions, folks? You don't have any at this point.
Can you maybe, I don't know, since you guys have been working on this, you're thinking a lot about the potential that's behind it. Can you give me like this, I don't know, really crazy visionary use case for these tools? What have you thought of in your head, like how this can be used potentially to do some really cool stuff with Matterport?
Well, I think as the models get complex, I think one of the big things, this may not seem visually big, but there'll be additional content constantly being added to models, content that it comes from our partners, other applications that aren't in the initial model, right? And as those get more complex, you need to be able to manage that by unloading and loading things that are relevant to the user's current experience. So I think one of the big things is being able to manage in a spatial way what you see and unloading what you see such that you're not overloading your system performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is that visionary? I don't know, but I feel like that's a very important aspect of a scaling, a Matterport model.
Yeah. So, just to build on what Guillermo mentioned, sky's the limit. If you look at this, what we're unlocking here is a way to engage with the customers. We know what they are, what their perspective is, and where they are, and may not be visionary to me. In my mind, what strikes is if we can build a VR model and have a Halloween theme around it, where I walk through a dark room and things pop out at me as my perspective changes. There's a lot of possibility with this. Yes, we are unlocking some basic capabilities, easier to implement as well, if you think about it.
And these are not yet sensitive to the cursor, just your view and your position within the model.
Right.
Is that something that you're planning on creating sensors for a cursor?
We could do that. We already have something called a pointer intersection that serves that purpose, but we likely will want to transfer that to the sensors and sources system. But that's an existing system. Yes. I think there's one more question.
Yes.
Yes. So what's the overhead of having a source per entity versus per room, lazy loading purposes? From Stephen.
There's very little overhead for these. They're really lightweight objects. I don't think there's anything to call out as far as resources. So Dustin is also works on the SDK with me. He built the system, so maybe this is something he could give us shed some light on.
Setup and teardown should be fairly minimal. That shouldn't really play a part in any kind of resource constraints. There is the potential for additional raycasts against the model to detect occlusion. So maybe that's something you might have to watch out for if you're adding hundreds of these. But otherwise, simple volume tests and the raycast is really probably the biggest major things. But even then, the collision or the overlap volume collisions is the pretty negligible, I believe.
Thank you.
We are at the halfway mark, Amir. I think if there are no other questions, we could leave the forum, the email forum open for the partners to reach out to us. Again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So as I mentioned, sorry, Raghu. So this is recorded, obviously, and we'll have all this information online. We'll share a link in a follow-up email after the webinar, so you can watch this, share it with your friends, whatever you want, along with the links to contact us at what is it, developers@matterport.com.
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. With any questions, right? So that's open to anything that is not specific to sensors, but anything SDK and API related.
Yeah,
So-
and also new topics as well, Amir. Any folks want to hear any specific spotlight topics from developer standpoint, write to us, and we will be happy to facilitate a conversation just the way we did it today. Very focused topics or even broader topics are up for grabs.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So with that, if there are no other questions about sensors, I hope you found the information useful and you enjoyed it. And looking forward to to seeing some models and you guys using this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I'll give you back 25 minutes. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.